Sugarplum by Johanna, Johnston. Once there was a little girl named Susie who had a tiny little doll not much bigger than your thumb called Sugarplum. Sugarplum was so little that the rest of Susie's dolls thought she was a trinket, a bangle, or a knick-knack, but not a real doll at all. That bothered Sugarplum. "What I need is clothes," she said. "If I had clothes, real clothes of cloth, they'd know I was a doll. Nobody makes skirts for a trinket. Nobody puts bows on a bangle. Oh, Susie, please make me some clothes." But somehow or other, Susie never did, and instead of getting clothes, Sugarplum just got lost. Once Susie took her to school in her pocket and stood her on her desk during spelling. Well, that was fun, and Sugarplum knew not one of the big dolls could have done it, in spite of their fancy clothes. But then Susie took her out to recess, and while she was playing hide-and-seek, Sugarplum bounced out of her pocket and landed on the ground. "She'll see me right away," thought Sugarplum. "I'm not lost this time." But she was. She had landed between two roots of a tree. And when Susie missed her and came looking, the dead leaves had blown over Sugarplum, and Susie didn't see her at all. A long time went by, a night and a day, and then a friendly bird found her there. He was very kind. He picked Sugarplum up in his beak and flew her right to the steps of the school. And that was where Susie found her the next morning. "Sugarplum!" she cried. "Here you are! Oh, I'm so glad!" She wiped the dirt off Sugarplum's tiny face with her finger, and she said, "Sugarplum, this very afternoon I'm going to make you some clothes." Sugarplum almost hopped out of Susie's hands in her joy. It was worth being lost if this happened afterwards. The big dolls were going to see she wasn't a trinket, a bangle, or a knick-knack, but a real doll, although very small. And sure enough, that very afternoon, Susie did cut out a tiny snip of cloth. She cut a tiny, tiny hole in it for Sugarplum's head. She threaded a needle and started to sew, but oh! Susie's stitches were so large, and the cloth was so small. Susie lost her patience in no time at all. "Oh, you have a painted dress," said Susie. "You don't want real clothes." And she put Sugarplum back on the doll shelf just as she'd been before, with no new dress, no new skirt, not even a ribbon or a bow. The big dolls stared out over her head just as they'd always done, and Sugarplum could only hope that someday Susie would try again. But before she had hoped for more than a day, she got lost again. This time she fell behind the bureau, where Susie had set her before she left for school. She fell down against the wall behind the bureau, and then, after a while, a buzzing sort of roar filled the room. And then, all of a sudden, a great big brush came nosing behind the bureau. It nosed closer and closer to Sugarplum, and then whoosh! It had sucked her up into its dark insides. Whiz, whoom! Sugarplum whirled on a dark gale of wind. And then plop! Sugarplum came to rest in piles of soft dust. "Dear me," thought Sugarplum, "where am I now?" She slithered around in the dark and the dust, and all she found was 2 straight pins, 3 burnt matches, and 1 old penny. She didn't find any way out. So Sugarplum sat down in the dust again and tried to find something cheerful about this predicament. "I guess I should be glad I don't have real clothes," she thought finally. "They'd be getting so dirty in here." But she wasn't very glad, because she couldn't see how she'd ever be found this time. Then suddenly the roaring stopped. There were bangings and bumpings instead, and Sugarplum rolled and bobbed in the dust, and then, all at once, the top came off her prison. There was light again. But Sugarplum was upside down. She and the dust were falling, snick, onto a paper on the floor. Clink! That was the penny falling. Oh, lucky for Sugarplum that the penny had been lost too. The cleaning woman's fingers went hurrying through the dust to find it. And right by the penny, the fingers found a gray little dirty little doll. "Well," said the cleaning woman, picking up Sugarplum, "Susie will be glad to see this dolly, I guess." Susie was, too. "Sugarplum!" she cried. "Oh, you poor child, you do need a bath." And then, "I'm really going to make you some clothes." Then Sugarplum forgot all about being lost and almost danced in Susie's hand. But oh! Once again, the cloth was so small. Susie's stitches were so big and her patience so short. Sugarplum was back on the doll shelf in no time at all, still without any real clothes. This time Sugarplum was truly a little discouraged. The big dolls looked down at her coldly. "Lost again," one of them sniffed. "In the vacuum," said another, rolling her eyes. "Just like a marble or a whistle or a gimcrack, not at all like a real doll." Sugarplum stamped a tiny foot. "But I am a real doll. I am. I'll show you somehow. And you watch. I won't ever get lost again." Well, that was easy to say, but Sugarplum was so little, she was always slipping behind cushions, falling into cracks. She had to be careful all the time to leave one arm sticking up, or a foot, so Susie would see her soon. She was so careful that she wasn't really lost for a long, long time. And then one day, Susie set her on a little shelf in the kitchen, right over the kitchen stove where Susie's mother was cooking. Susie set her very near the edge, but it still might have been all right if Susie and her mother hadn't suddenly left the kitchen in a hurry because the doorbell was ringing, and Susie knocked the shelf as she hurried by. For a minute, Sugarplum teetered. For a minute more, she tottered, right on the edge, and then she fell. But instead of the bang she expected, there was a splash. She fell into something rosy and warm. Sweet pink syrup closed over her head, and there she was, in the oddest place yet, deep in a glass of warm new apple jelly. Sugarplum stared out at a rosy world and wasn't downhearted at all. I can see out, she thought, so they can see in. They'll find me in no time here. And she would have been right, except there were lots of glasses of jelly, all in rows. And they all had labels on, and when Susie's mother came back, she was in a big hurry to pour the paraffin on the tops. She didn't look into each glass before she sealed it up. She didn't turn the glasses around as she took them to the shelf. And so finally, there was Sugarplum all sealed up in a jar of apple jelly, on a shelf down in the cellar. Down there in the dark, it wasn't so rosy. Days went by and nights went by, but they were all the same in the cellar. Once a mouse came along and peered into the glass, but Sugarplum couldn't make him hear her, and he scurried on. More days and nights went by, and Sugarplum was very sad. I guess I'm lost for good this time, she thought. And I guess I can't be much more than a trinket, a bangle, or a knick-knack. For who ever heard of a real doll getting lost in a glass of jelly? The big dolls were right, she sighed. I am not a real doll at all. And then one day, after it seemed to Sugarplum she'd been on the shelf forever, somebody lifted the jelly glass off the shelf and carried it upstairs. Light shone in through the rosy jelly, and the world looked brighter. Somebody popped the paraffin off, ran a knife around the edge of the jelly. Somebody turned the glass over on a dish, and then lifted the glass of jelly. And then, for goodness sake, said Susie's mother, for goodness gracious sake. Sugarplum could hardly wait for Susie's mother to take a spoon and lift her out of the jelly, but instead, Susie's mother suddenly said, No, just like that. Maybe that will make Susie smile a little at last. Sugarplum couldn't understand what Susie's mother meant by that at all. Susie was always smiling. But then Susie's mother put the dish of jelly, with Sugarplum still in it, on a tray. She carried the tray, not to the dining room, but all the way upstairs to Susie's bedroom. And then through the rosy jelly, Sugarplum saw Susie lying down in a bed. What's happened? Thought Sugarplum. What's wrong? Is Susie sick? Susie's mother put the tray down by the bed. I've brought you a surprise, she said. Susie sighed. Yes, she said, not caring. Here's a spoon, said her mother. See how you like sugarplum jelly. Sugarplum jelly? Asked Susie, but still not as though she cared. But she did take the spoon, and she looked at the jelly, and then she sat straight up in bed and cried out, Oh, it can't be. Oh, it isn't. And she dipped in the spoon, and it was. It really is Sugarplum herself, cried Susie. And she laughed out loud. She's laughing, said Susie's mother happily. She's laughing, said all the big dolls who were lined up on the bed. Susie's laughing at last. Now she'll get better, and it's Sugarplum's doing, the big dolls said. Why, she must be a sort of a doll after all. Sugarplum could hardly believe her ears. The big dolls had said it at last. Susie was laughing. The big dolls were smiling. Sugarplum thought she couldn't be happier ever. But she was, very soon, for when Susie had laughed till her cheeks were pink as the apple jelly, Susie's mother gave Sugarplum a bath. Then she brought Susie a needle, some thread, and some cloth, and then she helped Susie make Sugarplum a tiny, tiny dress. She helped till Susie had finished it completely, right down to the sleeves and the hem. It was a perfect little dress, and Sugarplum's own. Now, said Susie as she buttoned it on, you look like a real doll at last. The big dolls nodded. It was true. Nobody puts dresses on trinkets. Nobody puts bows on a bangle. And whoever heard of a knick-knack bringing a little girl's smile back? Sugarplum's a real doll, cried all the big dolls. And a real doll she was from then on, and because of the sash Susie tied around her middle, she never got lost again.